All right. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles, with your favorite conservatarian, me, Jeff Charles. Got another fire episode for you today. We're going to talk about a few different things that are big in the news right now. Some might be a little bit outrageous, but I think you'll get a kick out of it. I'm going to talk about the FBI again and how it's been politicized. I'm going to talk about a questionable law that's being introduced in Virginia's state legislature. And I'm going to address this whole Alex Jones thing. I think some of you aren't going to be too fond of what I'm going to say on that. But that's okay. That's what these conversations are for. But before I go into everything, again, welcome. And be sure to subscribe if you haven't done that already. That way you'll be notified whenever I upload a new episode. Also, give me a 5-star rating on whatever podcast app you're using. 5 stars, that's going to help me out a lot. And also, leave me a comment. Leave a little bit of a review letting people know why you love this podcast so much. All right? Deal? Great. Okay. So let's get into this. First, I want to talk about the FBI. And I've been talking about how the FBI is being politicized for quite a while now. And it didn't just start over the past couple years or so, right? We saw how some of their agents behaved during the 2016 presidential election when they were found to have been spying on Donald Trump, trying to use the Steele dossier to discredit him and to discredit his election, which is interesting because they're complaining about people who questioned the 2020 election when they did the same thing with 2016. But since then, it's been pretty clear that the FBI had a thing for Trump. Like they still do. It still appears that way. I mean, they had that raid on his home a couple months ago, and we're still waiting on what's going to happen with that whole thing. Again, I'll change my mind on that if other evidence presents itself. But for all intents and purposes, it is coming off as a politically motivated endeavor on their part. But the Bureau's politicization has gone even beyond Trump. And, you've also seen over the past few years, or even just recently, how they have gone after people, maybe not explicitly for their views, but for their views. And this has really come up with the issue of abortion. Ever since the Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade, abortion has been a hot topic. And I'm not talking about the clothing store. But over the past year, we've seen a lot of violence coming from the pro-abortion side. And we've seen a bit of a bias, maybe not a bit of a bias, a lot of bias on the part of the Federal Bureau of Investigation in how it's going after supposed crimes committed by both sides. So it is clear that at this point, they are not a neutral enforcer of federal laws. And realistically, the FBI has always been politicized, even from its inception, if I'm going to be fair. I mean, it was used against people on the left. It's been used against people on the right. It was used against black people in the civil rights movement. They were even spying on Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul. So, I mean, this bureau has always had issues with corruption and political bias. But right now, we can clearly see who their targets are, which is why you've got a lot of people on the right calling for the defunding of the FBI. At least they woke up at some point. Now, if they can only apply that to state and local law enforcement as well, that'd be great. Now, I'm not talking about defund the police. I'm talking about rooting out corruption, right? So, here's what's going on. Now, as you know, the Bureau is not supposed to be engaged in partisan politics. And they definitely aren't supposed to choose which cases to take seriously based on the politics of the matter. But this is what they've done on the abortion issue. So last week, there was video footage that surfaced showing armed FBI agents arresting a man named Paul Vaughn. I believe he was in Tennessee. He's 55 years old. And he had been participating in anti-abortion protests. So he's a pro-lifer. And when you're looking at the footage, you can hear a woman, probably his wife, asking the agents why they were banging on her door with guns and asking them to explain why they were arresting this man, and the agents refused to answer. Now, Vaughn was just one of 11 pro-lifers who are being indicted in Tennessee because they allegedly blocked access to an abortion clinic in the state. And this occurred during a protest in March. Not March of this year, March of 2021. That's right. They arrested these people and they are indicting them for something that they did in March last year. Now, this is apparently our esteemed FBI doing yeoman's work and keeping us safe by taking these dangerous pro-life protesters off the streets. I mean, imagine how many lives have been saved because these people are being hauled to jail. And again, Vaughn was only one of these individuals. The others got a not-so-friendly visit from armed FBI agents as well. Okay. Now, I know that there are laws in most states against blocking access to abortion facilities. It's not against the law to protest. The First Amendment protects that. But I guess you're not allowed to prevent people from entering physically. Now, I don't know the details of all these cases, and I'm not sure whether they actually broke the law or not. But the idea that you wait over a year, like a year and a half, to effect an arrest, and it just comes off a little bit suspicious to me, especially given the fact that we have seen a lot of political bias coming from the Bureau. Now, meanwhile, remember all those fire bombings and acts of vandalism that pro-abortion activists have been perpetrating against pro-life organizations like crisis pregnancy centers, advocacy groups, churches? They've been firebombing them. They've been vandalizing and destroying the parts of these buildings. And so far, they haven't escalated to targeting humans, but that is the only logical conclusion, especially if nothing is done about it. And speaking of which, the FBI has not arrested a single person in connection with these acts of violence and vandalism. Not a single one. In fact, they aren't even talking about it. So I read an article, I believe this was in the Daily Signal, and the Wisconsin Family Action. This is a group that is a pro-life. It was one of the first to be vandalized, and it happened shortly after the draft opinion coming from the Supreme Court was leaked to the public, basically saying that they were going to overturn Roe v. Wade. So they firebombed the place. And they even spray painted a message on one of the walls. It said, quote, "If abortions aren't safe, then you aren't either." Now, this was done by a pro-abortion, in my opinion, domestic terrorist group called Jane's Revenge. They took credit for it, and also for several other acts of vandalism. They posted some of these things online. They also reached out to a journalist named Robert Evans, who is a lefty, but he basically just relayed the message that they sent to him. I'm not saying he condones this. And by the way, he's got a great podcast called Behind the Bastards. You should check that out. If you're a conservative, you won't agree with the political views, but it's very educational, very interesting. Anyway, but I digress. Yes, I just plugged a left-wing podcast, but it's great. So anyway, Jane's Revenge, in their message, they said that this was, quote, "just a warning," and they promised more violence. They said, quote, "We demand the disbanding of all anti-choice establishments, fake clinics, and violent anti-choice groups within the next 30 days. And they've carried out other acts of violence. And they're not the only ones. There are other pro-abortion activists who are carrying out these acts, and I'll get to the numbers in a second. But the FBI showed up after the firebombing. The ATF showed up as well, and they looked around, did their thing, and since they left, they've said nothing about it. So Jelaine Appling, she's the president of Wisconsin Family Council, and she told the Daily Signal that she has heard, quote, nothing from the FBI after they left our office on the day of the attack, May 8th. Now, she said she wasn't sure whether the FBI or ATF took pictures of the scene because they were behind closed doors all day long. And she said that she has also never received anything in writing. Now, she did say that the Bureau called one time to check on a phone number, and that was mid to late May. And then she said, quote, crickets since then. Now, in another Daily Signal report, the author noted that, quote, the Federal Bureau of Investigation will not share whether it has made any arrests related to attacks on pro-life centers, organizations, and Catholic churches following the leak of the Supreme Court opinion overturning Roe v. Wade. Now, the report said at least 83 Catholic churches and 73 pregnancy resource centers or pro-life organizations have been attacked since the draft opinion was leaked in May. So that's over 100. And these centers and organizations have also told the Daily Signal that they haven't heard anything from federal authorities on the matter. There are no updates, no questions, no nothing. It's a wall of silence coming from the Bureau. Now, the FBI released a statement to the Daily Signal that, ironically enough, was basically the same statement that they issued to the Daily Wire on this matter. And it said that it is investigating, quote, a series of attacks and threats targeting pregnancy resource centers, faith-based organizations, and reproductive health clinics across the country, as well as to judicial buildings, including the U.S. Supreme Court. They said they, quote, take all violence and threats of violence very seriously and is working closely with our law enforcement partners at the national, state, and local levels to investigate these incidents. Yeah, I'm going to call BS. I'm calling BS on this. These are lies. They are lying and the truth ain't in them. Here's my thing. This is the Federal Bureau of Investigation that we're talking about here. We're not talking about some small law enforcement agency in a podunk rural area of the country. Not trying to, disrespect them, but I'm just saying the FBI, this is the federal government of these here United States of America. This agency has a near unlimited supply of resources that it could bring to bear on this matter. Look at how easily they rounded up the people who were involved in the January 6th riots at the U.S. Capitol building. There were thousands of people in that area, and they managed to track so many of these people down from different states, different localities, and they were able to round them up. There's no reason why they haven't been able to make a single arrest, not even one person, in connection with these crimes. Now, I can understand that they had gotten some people, and then maybe not others. I mean, I don't expect them to be perfect. But if they were actually trying to find out who was carrying this stuff out, with the resources they have, they could have found some people. Come on now. I mean, it's interesting because they're prioritizing this supposed threat of white supremacy, because that's what they've been trying to sell us on, and whistleblowers are saying that they're cooking the numbers on that to categorize cases as white supremacist violence or white supremacist cases that don't really have much to do with white supremacy. They have even, according to these whistleblowers, they have allegedly allocated agents and resources from child abuse cases and put it towards rooting out these threats of white supremacist violence, ostensibly to justify their claim that domestic extremism coming from the right is the biggest threat to national security, because that's what they've been claiming over the past few years. And it sounds like they're not coming up with a whole lot. The demand is more than the supply, it seems. I'm not saying that there's no white supremacist violence. We saw what happened in Buffalo, New York, and in other cases too. So I'm not saying there's absolutely none, but I'm not convinced that there is enough to make the claim that this is some dire threat to national security. Now, again, I'm willing to be proven wrong if other evidence comes up, but I've been waiting, and it hasn't happened, right? So, to put it simply, these people are lying. They are not interested in dealing with the people who are responsible for this violence and vandalism. They're not making an effort, but they have all the time in the world to go after these pro-life protesters from last March who may or may not have been blocking an entryway to an abortion clinic. And we don't even know if they actually physically stopped people from going in. I'm suspecting they didn't. But these folks could be, I mean, I don't know what the punishment is for it. So I don't know if this is punishable by prison or by a fine or something like that. But the fact of the matter is our federal government is devoting resources to these people when there are others who are actually engaging in acts of violence. I'm glad that they haven't gone after people yet. But there's already an instance of an old woman being shot because of an argument over abortion. She was handing out pamphlets that was encouraging people to go against a measure in her state that would have supported abortion, which is her right to do that. And she got shot. Now, it wasn't by one of these groups, but whatever. I mean, it's only going to be a matter of time before they escalate, especially since a lot of these laws have been going into effect in red states that are restricting abortion. But here's the thing. Well, what can be done about it? I mean, the GOP would have to hold the FBI accountable when they have enough power. I'm sure they're going to take the House, possibly even the Senate, but even then, are they going to have enough influence to actually do something about this? I'm not sure that they will. I mean, we might have to wait until there's another Republican president in the White House in 2024, because that would be under his purview. I mean, whether that's Trump or someone else, that's what's going to happen. And until then, we're just going to have to deal with the FBI being corrupt. And I hate to say it, but it's true. I mean, I'm glad that a lot of this stuff is getting out there. I'm glad that these whistleblowers are coming forward. There's a lot of scandals going on at the Bureau. Maybe I'll do a segment on that one day, just all the stuff that's been happening with these whistleblowers, because I've been writing about it, but I haven't, talked about it verbally yet. So that's the latest on what your FBI is up to, dear listener. I'll leave it there for right now, but I know that there will be more. But until then, I'll see you on the flip side. Stay tuned.